What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine, a gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said, "Hello," on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. "I am tired of fooling around," he said. "As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go F themselves." He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. "Something for your poetry now?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught the scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. Alright, so we're going to be analyzing The Colonel by Carolyn Forche. Alright, so starting off, she writes, "What you have heard is true. I was in his house." So from this, we can say that she is the speaker because she was in his house, and what you have heard is true. So we can infer that she has maybe told the people about what had happened in this house, or she's written about something that happened here, but it's all true because she states that she was in fact there. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. So these are all kind of things that normal people would do. So when you read that, you don't really think of anything crazy. You're just like, oh, that would happen in any average family. But we'll see later that that's not true. So there were daily papers, pet dogs, and a pistol on the cushion beside him. So when she mentions the pistol, that's when we start to think that maybe something is not quite right. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. So from this, we can infer that maybe they weren't an English-speaking family, or maybe that wasn't their primary language. And on the television was a cop show. So from this, we can tell that he's a manly man, and he likes guns and violence and action. So yeah, broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. So from this, we can say that this is a way to keep people out, and maybe the colonel doesn't want people in his area. He wants to live a pretty secret private life. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine, a gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. So again, that's just she's just describing it's just a normal dinner that she was invited to, nothing crazy. But also they do have a maid, so you can say that they have money and power. The maid brought green mango, salt, and a type of bread. So she says a type of bread, so she doesn't know what type of bread it is because she is visiting, so she's unfamiliar. So kind of unfamiliar. So we can kind of say that she doesn't really know. She's kind of new, so she doesn't know what to expect. I was asked how I enjoyed this country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. So this brief commercial in Spanish interrupts her answer, showing that she's not very important, or showing that her answer's not really important. His wife took everything away. So again, his wife and the maid kind of just shows that women were there to serve men. Women served men, which is common, especially in like Latin America. The women are normally known to be the ones who cook and clean for the men. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and push himself away from the table. So this just kind of shows like how aggressive the colonel is, and how he has like a short temper, and he's kind of like entitled, and how dare like a bird interrupts him. Like that, what he has to say is so important that now he's interrupted, so he gets really mad. My friend said to me with his eyes, say nothing. So we know that now that she has a friend there, and we can say the fact that they're talking with their eyes, that it's a very hostile environment, and so they have to like they have to like go to like not even say anything to communicate, so the colonel doesn't like blow up on them. The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. That's crazy. They were like dried peach halves. So that the simile of them being like dried peach halves kind of goes back to the fact that they were brought in by a grocery bag. So the author kind of was like, oh, he's bringing in groceries, but just kidding, they're ears. And it kind of just like to shows how like disgusting and like wrinkly and old they were, like they were rotting. Then she goes on to say, there's no other way to say this. So that just shows like she was in like complete shock that there were ears on the table. And we thought like the ears kind of like being removed from people, because obviously like this is during a war, and specifically a war in El Salvador. So we can say that the taking of the ears is kind of like stripping away like the freedom, and kind of showing like the torture and the violence against people, and how it just really takes away someone's livelihood if you like take away their ears. All right, he took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. So when he says that he shook it in their faces, that kind of sounds like he thinks of them as like a prize, like look what I just won, or look what I did, like kind of like bragging about it. It came alive there. So when he says this, or when she says this, the fact that it came alive kind of represents again the torture and the violence, but also kind of like a shred of hope that someone will save them and kind of realize the violence that's happening and will help. I'm tired of fooling around, he said. As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go F themselves. He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. Normally when you hold like a drink in the air, it's kind of for like a toast or a cheers. So again, going back to like kind of him celebrating the fact that he's cut off all of these ears, and just like how it's his prize. So yeah, something for your poetry now. So now we kind of get more about the speaker. So the speaker is a poet, and now we can infer that maybe she came to the colonel's house to gather information for her poetry work. Some of the ears were on the floor. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. So this is a NAFRA, and that kind of just like emphasizes the ears on the floor and how they were like kind of still like hearing and like still there, like kind of still representing the people that they once were on. And yeah.
Okay, so we are going to use soapstone to further analyze this poem. The first thing is speaker. So we know that the speaker is this woman who's the narrator because it says I was in the house, and she's using her point of view to write this, and she really talks with a lot of observations about the house and about how the whole evening is going. The occasion is, so the place is El Salvador, and the time is May 1978, and you can see that down here, and we did some research just to make sure that that was correct. The time and place, and it's El Salvador because, once again, we looked that up. El Salvador was in a civil war during this time, so that kind of shows part of the purpose of it, but also just how this occasion is tied in. The audience is really anyone, but probably more specifically towards people that lived in El Salvador and anyone that's going through civil war. The purpose is a political message about the colonel and his intensity of the war and how like powerful this man is, and he has such a high rank, obviously, because it's called the colonel, but he's such an aggressive person, and you can see that from how he is reacting during this evening and how he like spilled the ears on the table. The subject is a girl who we don't really know who she is. We just know that she's new, and she comes to this dinner party, and she sees the true personality of this colonel, and she's with her friend, as we can see. I don't know what else to say. We'll go with that. Okay. And finally, the tone of this is very hostile, but also the narrator shows a passive attitude because she says that she says nothing, and she is kind of like a warning because she shows how aggressive the colonel is, and during this time of war, people really need to see what their leaders are like. I think that's good.